After watching some of these movies, you might never look at the East Coast the same way again. Because horror movies have taught us one thing, that it's not just the middle of nowhere that's scary. Sometimes it's beaches, small towns, old houses, and quiet neighborhoods. The kind of places that feel safe until they're not. One trip to the coast, one rainy night in an old home, or one summer with friends, and suddenly everything turns into a nightmare. So today we're looking at 5 East Coast horror movies that you need to watch. And for this video I wanted to keep the New England vibe, the fall foliage movies, off this list because I'll be doing another video on specifically New England movies later. But anyways, let's get started. Our first movie is Jaws from 1975. Man, this is such a legendary way to kick off an East Coast horror movie list. Jaws isn't just a classic, but it's actually one of the most important movies, period, ever created. And it perfectly captures that coastal East Coast type of fear with sharks, with there having more sharks in that area, more active sharks, especially when it comes to human attacks, and it just preys on our fears of that so well. The story takes place in the small beach town of Amity Island, where a series of brutal shark attacks start happening just as summer tourists begin to arrive. The town officials try to keep things quiet, but it quickly spirals out of control. A police chief, a marine biologist, and a shark hunter team up to track down the massive great white responsible. What follows is a tense battle between man and nature, all centered around the open ocean. This movie taps into such a real fear. The ocean already feels mysterious, and this movie just taps deeper into that fear and makes it even more terrifying. It builds suspense perfectly. You don't even see the shark much at first, which somehow makes it even scarier. It's just one of those movies that sticks with you, and you actually think twice before going in the water ever again. In the scene when we have the main character sitting by the water, and the suspense that's built in that scene where he's looking up from his book or his newspaper, and it's slow and nothing's happening. We see a kid deep out in the ocean. We know it's gonna happen, but the intenseness of the situation, of everyone just having a good time, and just him knowing that something bad is about to happen, there's nothing he can do about it but watch, and we're in his shoes as well, just watching, and it's just so scary. Fun fact, the film is set on the East Coast in Massachusetts, and that classic New England beach town vibe is a huge part of what makes it work. The docks, the boats, the small town energy, it all feels so real. And the mechanical shark actually barely worked during filming, which is why it actually was shown less than they wanted to, but that ended up making the movie even more suspenseful. You can watch Jaws on Netflix. Our second movie is I Know What You Did Last Summer from 1997. Man, this movie is peak East Coast summer horror. It has a perfect mix of beach town vibes and slasher vibes that just make this such an amazing film. And some people like it, some people hate it, and I know the new one just came out. I haven't seen that yet, but I think this movie is awesome, and it just gives me those Scream vibes. I like those late 90s, early 2000s horror movies. It might be my favorite kind of era of horror, so this one is a must for me. The story follows a group of friends who accidentally hit a man with their car on a dark coastal road and decide to cover it up. A year later, they start receiving mysterious messages. Someone knows what they did. One by one, they're stalked by a hook-wielding killer, turning their quiet seaside town into a nightmare. The tension builds as they try to figure out who's after them and why. This one is just so fun and tense. It's got that classic 90s slasher energy, but what makes it work so well and stand out is the setting. You have that foggy coastal town, and that vibe adds so much atmosphere, and it makes everything feel more isolated and eerie. It's one of those movies that always makes you feel like something's watching you just out of sight, just out of reach, and you can't quite see. You're looking in the backgrounds of the film, seeing if you can see a hook, but you never know until it just appears. And it'll make you think twice the next time you run someone over with your car and try to cover it up. Fun fact, the film is set in a fictional coastal town in North Carolina, and it really leans into that East Coast beach town feel. Docks, fishing boats, late night roads, and a heavy fog. The summer setting mixed with the horror makes it feel unique compared to most slashers. You can watch I Know What You Did Last Summer on Apple and Fandango, to name just a few. Our third movie is The Taking of Deborah Logan from 2014. Alright, this one is a seriously underrated found footage horror movie that gets much darker than you would expect. The Taking of Deborah Logan starts off kind of normal, but then it slowly turns into something extremely disturbing. The story follows a documentary crew filming an elderly woman named Deborah Logan, who appears to be suffering from Alzheimer's. But as they keep recording, strange and increasingly horrifying behaviors start to emerge. What initially seemed like a medical decline turns into something far more sinister, involving possession and dark rituals. The deeper they dig, the more out of control everything becomes. This movie works so well because it feels so grounded at first. It feels like, just a real kind of heartwarming situation. And since it feels so real, the horror hits even more harder when it finally starts to ramp up, and it ramps up very fast. The performances are unsettling in the best way, and that shift from emotional drama to full-on horror is handled really well. It keeps you locked in the entire time and has one of the most shocking and horrifying visual images in a horror movie that I've seen in a while. I checked this one out a few months ago. I'm in my found footage era, really right now still. And this one, it was awesome. It's made by the same people who made Hell House LLC, which is one of my favorite horror franchises ever, really. But this one is it's right there. It's just as good almost. Fun fact, the film is set in a quiet rural town on the east coast of Virginia, and that isolated small community feeling adds a lot of tension. The houses, the woods, and the remote roads all contribute to that something is off here atmosphere. It also blends medical horror with supernatural elements in a really unique way that I've never seen before. You can stream The Taking of Deborah Logan on Tubi, Roku, and Sling all for free. Our fourth movie is The Conjuring from 2013. Alright, this one is East Coast haunted house horror at its peak. The Conjuring is easily one of the most well-known modern horror movies, and it has earned its spot by a mile. The story follows paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren as they are called to help a family in rural Rhode Island who have moved into a farmhouse that's clearly not normal. Strange noises, unexplained bruises, and escalating paranormal activity begin to take over the house. As things get worse, the Warrens realize the haunting is far darker and more dangerous than they first thought. This movie is pure atmosphere and tension. The atmosphere and tension are what allow this movie to have some of the greatest jump scares in all of horror history. But with that being said, it doesn't rely on constant jump scares. It is actually able instead to slowly build dread in this isolated East Coast farmhouse setting. The pacing, the sound design, and performances make everything feel so grounded, which makes the horror hit way harder when it actually shows up and shows itself. And the Bathsheba image towards the end of the film and just the lore around what they're trying to build with this movie is so terrifying, and it's interesting with how they build the lore and how it all connects. And I love lore in movies, and that's why this is honestly one of my favorite movies ever, and I have such nostalgia with this one because this was my first favorite horror movie, and the one it might be the movie I've watched the most close to, probably 2017. I've watched more, but it's up there with that because I used to watch this with my friends all the time and try to watch the reaction to the jump scares. This is a nostalgia one for me, and I love it. And this franchise is one of my favorite franchises ever as well. I just love this thing. Even the most recent one that came out, I thought it was awesome. But if you want to see my thoughts on any of the Conjuring franchise movies, I have a whole list on my channel. Fun fact, this film is set in Rhode Island, and the real-life farmhouse location adds a lot of weight to the story since it's based on alleged true events. That classic New England rural setting, old wood houses, dense forests, and quiet isolation plays a huge role in making the film feel so unsettling. You can watch The Conjuring on HBO Max. Our fifth movie is It from 1990. Alright, this is a classic East Coast horror staple. The original It is one of those movies that completely defined childhood fear for an entire generation, and lasting on after generation to generation. That is how scary. The story takes place in a small town of Derry, Maine, where a group of kids discover that something evil is living beneath the town, a shape-shifting entity known as Pennywise the Clown. Every 27 years it awakens and feeds on fear, mainly targeting children. The kids form a bond and realize they may be the only ones who can stop it, both as children and later as adults when the horror returns. This one is all about nostalgia mixed with pure fear, and I decided to go with It 1990 miniseries instead of It 2017 here on this list because I think It 2017 does capture more of that New England type of vibe, so that will probably be on that video. And I've already talked about that movie a lot. It's one of my favorite movies ever. So, but this movie also is one of my favorite movies ever. I have just such a warm spot in my heart for this movie because it's the most viral video here on this channel, the full breakdown and full movie recap. So if you want to go check that out, go watch it. But I love this movie. I also love the 2017 version. I don't know which one I like more, probably 2017, but that is a different story. But this movie is awesome. The East Coast setting in Derry, Maine gives it that perfect small town New England vibe. Quiet streets, forests, storm drains, and that feeling that something is always just out of sight. Pennywise is still one of the most iconic and interesting horror villains ever because he doesn't just scare you physically, but he gets inside your head and he dances. Fun fact, the town of Derry, Maine is a fictional East Coast location created by Stephen King, but it's heavily inspired by real New England towns. The classic Maine atmosphere, overcast skies, dense woods, isolated neighborhoods is all a huge part of what makes the story so unsettling. The miniseries was filmed primarily in Vancouver, but it still captures that East Coast small town dread perfectly. You can watch it on HBO Max and Hulu. Alright, there are 5 East Coast horror movies that you need to watch, but by far my top pick is It from 1990. I just love this one so much. It's got a ton of nostalgia for me personally, even though I wasn't even around during the time when this came out. And I enjoyed this one in the 2017 adaptation for both different reasons, and I love them both, as we were talking about earlier. The story of Pennywise and everything happening in Derry, Maine is one of my favorite stories in all of horror books, movies, anything. I just love it. There's something about the setting and the overall vibe that just feels so East Coast to me. Small town, storm drains, again forest, and the weird mix of cozy and unsettling at the same time. It's one of those horror stories I can rewatch over and over again, and it hits every single time. I mean, even the show that just came out recently, I think that is awesome, and I'm so excited to keep watching that. If you guys want a video on that show, I would love to do that. Let me know down below. Or the whole entire universe of it, because it's one of my favorites. But Stephen King just does such a great job at capturing the East Coast atmosphere in his stories. The small town Maine feeling, the isolation, the nostalgia mixed with fear. I just don't think anyone else does it quite like he does. If you haven't seen it yet for whatever reason, definitely go check it out. It is a classic for a reason. If you've seen any of these, let me know down below and let me know which ones I missed out of this list. Please drop a like and hit that subscribe button, or Pennywise will be in your sewers. Thank y'all so much for watching. Have a blessed day, and peace.